Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Lion Knights. Our two main knights, Gus and Doug, have been making their way home, and they have finally reached a little village in Berkshire, England. Ufham. The turnoff for Ufham on the Silchester Road is hard to spot, and the turnoff is the only road to Ufham. That stretch is tree-lined, and there is no signage and no effort to make the turnoff visible. Quite the reverse. The turnoff is a single-lane dirt road assiduously kept weedy. On top of that, people, ordinary unsundered people living in the Mond Minor, just never get around to noticing it. So they would certainly never notice the figure crouched in the shrubbery to the side, which was certainly just as well. Gus watched the car roll by as if he were starving and it were a movable feast. He had sat by the road watching for an hour or so, and that was only the fourth car. When it was well away and the engine sound completely lost even to Gus's sharp ears, a bit of traffic came down the Ufham road. It looked like a big burly man on a big brown horse. "Time for your fitting," Charlie Horse told him. "Yup." Gus rose, got on the weedy bit of road, and sauntered down it beside Charlie Horse. When the Silchester Road had been out of sight for at least 2 minutes, Charlie removed the bandana he had been wearing. His image rippled like a reflection on water, and he coalesced into his true appearance. "Did you enjoy seeing cars again?" "Them horseless carriages," Gus said, putting on a hick accent. "Passin' fad, never catch on." Then, normally, "Yeah, I did. Made it seem realer, truer, that I'm back on Earth, my Earth, the home zone, like you say." "We need to get you your own phone," Charlie Horse told Gus, waving his before tucking it away. "Not that I mind coming to fetch you." "Probably best to wait until we get back to America," Gus replied. "Then I'll call you. I wonder what happened to my old phone. I don't suppose I used it once after we got whisked away to Bariad Torgon. There were a few times it would have been handy on the road if the other guys had had theirs." He took a deep lungful of air and sighed, but contentedly, not wistfully. They were now strolling past little farmhouses and pastures, with the town proper straight ahead. "This sure is a pretty little place." "Thank you," said Charlie Horse, for whom it was now home. "For all of me, you are welcome here as often and as long as you want, and I think our officialdom will go along with that." "Thanks. Maybe someday Doug and I can come on an expedition with you as civilian consultants, real ones, once we get ourselves straightened out." He gave another contented sigh and gazed ahead. "Lovely." Charlie gave Gus a sideways glance. Lovely was not a word he would have expected from Gus, nor one he would have applied to Upham. Ahead, the dirt road broadened and became the High Street, while remaining a dirt road. It was flanked by Victorian buildings, many wooden, and looked, Charlie thought, like a Wild West TV set in the wrong countryside. It terminated in the base athletic field, at the track where Charlie had first managed to gallop. Beyond that were the boxier, less picturesque buildings of the base, and behind all was Upham Wood, concealing the passage to Brickell. 2 days before, Gus and Doug had emerged from those woods in company with Fletcher and his lads, plus Rahul and Dan. Then the Longmao had done nothing. They'd put in a packed schedule of strolling, poking around, lazing, and flaking out, and maybe that had been lovely. But at length Miss Duval was ready for them. She was ready for Gus now. He and Charlie took a right turn off the High Street and entered the shop. It was a big shop, with a tall ceiling for big, tall customers. The colors were muted, and there were many mirrors. And there was Doug. "Ta-da!" he proclaimed, facing Gus with spread arms. It was a wholly human Doug, something Gus had not seen for 5 years. "Holy crow! Mr. Douglas Shengming Chung, late of Chicago. Long time no see." "But wait, there's more," Doug said, gesturing back into the shop. On cue, Rahul and Dan came forward. Behind them trailed Miss Duval, and in the background sat Captain Fletcher. At a nod from him, Charlie tried and failed to enter unobtrusively and sat down beside him. Like Doug, Dan and Rahul were still clad in cavalry t-shirts and jeans, and, like him, looked fully human. They did not, however, look exactly as they had before. All were still about 7 feet tall and heavily built. "Your turn now," Doug told Gus, and stepped aside to make way for Miss Duval. She was a slender woman of late middle age, on the tall side, though she hardly looked it in present company. She wore a long dress of a markedly neutral gray and an opal ring on each thumb. In one hand she held a kind of bouquet of hand mirrors, monocles, and pince-nez glasses. In the other she held a scratched and yellowed plastic card. Gus's driver's license, the only image of a human Gus closer than Chicago. "August Virgil," she said, but not exactly to him, more at him, and there was a breath of magic in the use of his full name. Then she looked at him critically, followed by a glance at the license, then in a hand mirror. "Yes, ma'am," Gus answered, just in case, but she ignored this, seized him by the shoulders, and moved him in front of a mirror. "August Virgil," she muttered again, clearly to herself, then pulled a small flashlight out of a pocket and ran the beam over his face at close range. "Feel it?" Doug asked. Gus nodded. By now they could feel qualities of magic as well as its mere presence. Something light and heady was building around Gus now. Also, he could see something odd about the reflection of his face, though the flashlight beam kept getting in the way. For the first time, Miss Duval really addressed him. "Do you like this?" she said. The tone was purely one of factual curiosity, with no desire to please in it. She pointed at the mirror. "We are not at all done, but with a restorative glamour like this, it's important that you like looking this way. It helps anchor the image." Gus stared at the mirror, and Doug stared at Gus. "Truth to tell," Doug said, "I felt really strange when I saw myself looking restored." And Gus knew he felt odd looking at Gus now, too. Duval might not be finished, but she had taken a great first step. The muzzle was gone, along with the Neanderthal-like ridge of the brow. The nose and lips were recognizable. The eyes were human, not feline. But the ears were still long and pointed, and the tips of whiskers hovered above his shoulders. Gus looked down at his hands. They were still scaly on the back, with spurs on the knuckles, and the nails of the left were still filed into claws. He took another look at his face in the mirror. There was a slight blandness, partly as if he wore pancake makeup, partly a hint of the generic to the features. But on the whole, "Holy crow," he whispered. "Do you like it?" Miss Duval asked again. "Oh, yes, yes, ma'am, I do, yeah." He said to Doug, "I see what you mean about feeling strange. It was strange to see you just now, too. No offense, you guys," he said to Dan and Rahul, "but I never got to know your old faces very well." Miss Duval, meanwhile, seized his right hand and played the flashlight over it. Gus watched with interest as the scales and knuckle spurs faded out. She worked her way up his arm, erasing scales. Timidly, Gus felt along after her with his left hand, expecting her to swat him away, but she was well used to this sort of reaction from her customers. The scales were still there to the touch. Doug watched his friend make exactly the same exploration of his arm as he had himself, then asked Duval, "Will the glamour make it easier to get back to our old shapes? Give us a target to aim for?" "Perhaps," she said, switching to Gus's left arm, "and it may make it harder to make the shift perfect, since this appearance is not exactly like your old one. But for the most part, your new form will be a matter of reaching for your old form through body image and sheer history. So my Fey acquaintances tell me." She hiked Gus's t-shirt up off the top of his shoulder and finished off his arm. "How far do you want to go?" she asked. "Beg pardon?" Gus asked back, confused. You can take off your shirt, and I can do your chest and back, she explained then, continuing down a list, and said, or you can strip to your underwear if you want me to do your legs, or strip entirely if you want an illusion that covers everything. She then noticed that Gus's neck, which was still scaly, could still display a blush. She waved her hand before his face and let the blush show through there. Gus surveyed the smirks on Doug, Rahul, and Dan's humanized faces and asked, "How far did you guys take it?" "Skivvies," said Doug, after waiting a moment to savor the situation. "She asked Dan first, so we talked about it while you were off car spotting, and we figured that it was good enough to be thorough, but if we got down to the buff, we were probably in a situation where no glamour would be enough anyway." "Tails," said Gus, switching his meditatively. "Yeah," Doug agreed, and the end of his tail flicked in and out of visibility behind him as he switched too. "Here, skivvies means loincloths," he added to Fletcher and Charlie Horse. "We've never run across boxer shorts for guys with tails. It was hard enough keeping ourselves in pants." "For all my reputation for curiosity," Charlie answered, "that was still something I never thought to wonder about." Fletcher laughed. "What brings you here, Captain Phil?" Gus asked, oblivious to Charlie's brief cringe at the address. "This and that," Fletcher answered. "I am very curious to see your original faces, for a start. For a finish, I'm to write the check to Miss Duval when she's done. In between, your friends asked me to come along so we could continue a discussion. They are trying to decide how much to tell their families, and what and when. I suppose you must wonder about it too." Wordlessly, Miss Duval shoved a stool behind Gus and pushed him down on it so she could work on his ears. Gus said, "I remember we talked about telling him we'd been experimented on by an evil overlord or something to explain being so big, then claim it was wearing off when we were able to really change back. But that won't really work. I mean, we'd have to size down real slow to make it convincing. My folks aren't scientists, but they'll still wonder where 100 pounds of meat went. And Doug's folks are scientists." "Optometrists," Doug corrected. "But they'll still wonder. And they'll wonder why the evil overlord cured my astigmatism." "And I don't want to tell my mother she can't hug me," put in Rahul. "That will take more explaining than losing 100 pounds overnight." "I suppose we could use the experiment victim's story to start with," said Doug, "then tell them something else the first time they feel us through the glamour. But I don't know what." "Shirt," Miss Duval told Gus. As he pulled off his T-shirt, she turned to Doug and said, "Either tell them the truth immediately or never tell them any of it. Never appear to them without the glamour or at a different size. If you show yourself in stages, your family will always be wondering if there's another stage coming. I lied to you about being A. I'm really B. No, I'm really C. No, D. They'll wonder how far down the alphabet it goes. They won't trust you." "Ah, yes," said Fletcher, "that makes sense. I never thought of that angle before." He saw the young folks staring at him. "What, did you think I've thought of everything? I've lived my life deep in the sundered side of the world, only rarely using glamour to pass in the Mond Minor. Lads, I want you to keep in touch so I know how you fare, but I'm also curious to get reports from the border between the sundering and the unsundered. Anyway, what Miss Duval says rings true." She went over to the windows and twitched the curtains shut. She turned back to Gus and commanded, "Pants." As he worked on removing his boots, she said, "I've seen it when people get too cute with glamour, putting one layer on another. Then no one believes them when they say this is the real me. Things get harsh, and people insist on total disenchantments and stringent oaths, even exorcisms." Doug pondered for a bit, then asked, "Won't that sunder our families? If magic's part of your life, you're sundered, right?" Fletcher nodded. Charlie said, "That's not a catastrophe, though. This whole town is sundered, and Gus said it was lovely on the walk back here." "But it'll be dangerous for them, won't it?" Doug asked. "You've got a whole town here, and it's a military base, and backed up by your whole magical nation. You're as safe as sundered gets. But our families will have none of that. They'll just suddenly have their luck changed so that any day they could meet a monster, and it wouldn't be us." Maybe, maybe we should join their infantry, Dan suggested hesitantly, like the other guys, and only send letters home until we can learn to change. Miss Duval was just approaching Gus as he stood at uneasy attention in his loincloth, head and hands human, otherwise scaled and tailed. "Do I continue or not?" she demanded of Fletcher. He sighed. "We already owe you for 3.5 glamour jobs. It's silly not to owe you for 4, whatever they decide to do with them later. Please continue." He looked at Doug. "Yes, staying with us in some capacity until you can change is undoubtedly the safest option. And we'd certainly be glad to have as many of you as want to stay. It is certainly true that if you reveal yourselves, your families will be sundered, so that magical and openly supernatural events will no longer pass them by. But no one can be sure how long it will take you to learn to resume your original forms. I suspect it will take longer if you stay with us. You'll be busy learning how to live in Grand Normandy, not hugely different from Chicago, but still different. And you won't have as much incentive. It's relaxing to walk around town and have no one give you more than a look of mild curiosity, isn't it?" He turned to Charlie Horse. "Mr. Darnley, yours is the one sundered family in an unsundered town. Do you feel they're greatly endangered?" Charlie thought for a few seconds, then answered, "They do face some particular risks, but they're risks they bring on themselves in their work. Several of them deal in enchanted goods. And of course they know the precautions to take. Just being sundered and living in Dimble Abbots isn't particularly dangerous, I don't think. You just have to know to be polite to the fairies in the woods back of the house." He eyed the 4 Lung Mao who were eyeing him back. "You guys will be the local fairies." Fletcher pondered. "Your folk," he said to Charlie, "can still call on your Baron if any mundane major thing gets out of hand." "We've never had to, though, sir." "A good point, but the advantage is still there. Grand Normandy is thin on the ground in the U.S., but we've a fair number of outposts and enclaves in Canada. Chicago's fairly close to Canada, isn't it? And Rahul, where do you live?" Rahul blinked, and Doug could see he was readjusting to the idea that he lived somewhere in the ordinary world, what Fletcher called the Mond Minor. "Lahore, sir. At least it's the nearest big city." "Hmm. The main Grand Norman outposts are in Mumbai and Karachi. Dan?" "Out in the country, sir, between Kansas City and St. Louis." "South and west of Chicago, sir," supplied Doug, who noted Fletcher's brief blank gaze and suspected the old centaur barely knew these were American cities. "Maybe they could make an alliance with the Grandmother Spider Society, sir," Charlie Horse suggested. "Or the Dare Lodge?" Fletcher nodded, but then said, "Well, we will help you find allies, and as Mr. Darnley pointed out, you're not likely to need them." "Put your clothes back on," Miss Duval told Gus, who now looked completely human, if very large. He started to obey, but kept his eyes on the image in the mirror, fascinated. His tail tip appeared and vanished on either side as he whisked it back and forth, probing the limits of the illusion. "But if we don't get our folks sundered," he said, "that's still safer, right?" Fletcher said nothing for some seconds. Gus turned from the mirror to ask, "Did I say something wrong, sir?" Fletcher was silent another couple of seconds, then said, "Just thinking. I suppose there is some slight danger, but here's how slight it is. Sundered folk have no hesitation about raising their children in the Mond Major. There's no custom or drive or push to farm them out to unsundered relatives. That's as true in the U.S. and India as it is in Britain and France. Against that, there is a slight danger, but you must balance this. To leave them unsundered, you must permanently deceive them. And they would want to see you back soon, or you must think so, otherwise you would have tarried as the way your fellows did. And," he smiled, "against any danger, consider that they will have big fierce elf warriors on their side." "Come up here, all 4 of you," Miss Duval commanded. When the Lung Mao had formed a line, she produced 4 long white strips of silk and draped one over each man. Each cloth ran from his heels and back, over his head, down to his toes in front. Stand still, she ordered next, then stood still herself, gazing at each in turn. By now, everyone in the room had some degree of training in magical detection, and could pick up stirrings of some sort. After a minute, she removed the cloths one by one. Under each, the dragon cats now appeared without illusion. She handed the cloths back. Put them on, she instructed, as a scarf or belt or sash, it doesn't matter. They obeyed. There was a bit of a wobble in the air, and they appeared human again. Good, she said. Sleep with it under your pillow or around your neck or something. That'll keep it charged up. It runs off your own vis. Now realize the image is fragile. If you notice bits showing through, take the cloth off and put it on again. Don't let it get damaged. It's charmed to be resistant and not get lost, but I have my limits. To Fletcher, you can write that check now. A few minutes later, they were out on the street. So you think we should tell our families and sunder them? Doug asked. Your call, said Fletcher, but that is what I would want if you were my sons, I think. Each of you is going back to something different, but if it were me, that's what I'd want of you. Doug wondered how to compare a man who had turned into a centaur, the better to go exploring the edge of creation, with a pair of optometrists from Chinatown, Chicago. But those weren't the points to compare, were they? Next stop, Fletcher went on, the tailor shop. We need to get you some clothes that aren't cavalry issue. Can we keep the hats? Rahul asked. The hats are cool. Fletcher laughed. Hats, boots, and all, with my compliments. The van looked normal, with normal British plates. The four men loitered next to it and also looked normal, if very big, clad in jeans and t-shirts but free of cavalry logos. Rahul wore his cowboy hat. Fletcher, Sanders, and their students looked normal for them. Fletcher finished up a round of hugs and concluded with double handshakes with Gus and Doug. Lads, it's been a privilege, he said. See you next year. What? Asked Doug, startled. I said hope to see you soon. Doug glanced at Sanders, who smiled benignly and gave him a thumbs up. They climbed into the van. Next stop, Heathrow. O'Hare. Public phones are a dying breed, but there are still some left in O'Hare Airport. Doug, with Gus huddled by his side, crouched over one, dropped in the coins, and dialed. It bothered him that it had taken him so long to remember the number. He had had to check it with Gus. "Snatcheral," Gus had assured him. "I called your place a lot more often than you did, after all." It was early evening. The family ought to be home. He didn't want to leave a recording. She picked up on the fourth ring. "Hello?" "Mom, it's Doug." An inhaled shriek. "Doug? Doug? Oh, God! Oh, Kenai, darling! Where are you? Oh, God, is it really you? Are you all right? Where are you?" "It's me, Mom," he assured her, though he did not feel entirely certain he was telling her the truth. "I'm at O'Hare. I can be home in a couple of hours. You haven't moved or anything, have you?" "Oh, God!" And she was just weeping. No, we haven't moved. Oh, are you all right?" He didn't want to answer. "Are you all right? Is everybody okay? Dad and May and Amy and Sam?" Yes, we're fine. Oh, wait till they hear." Is Yeye still alive?" This was his grandfather. Yes, oh, he'll be ecstatic." Gus, bending over the phone with Doug, his cat ears well able to pick up her voice, gave an air punch. "Yes!" "Who's that?" "It's Gus, Mrs. C. I made it, too." "Gus! Oh, Gus! Your folks will... Oh, I don't know what to say. Your folks... Are you all right? Are both of you all right?" It was the third time she had asked. "Mom, we're all right, but we look different." "Oh, God, have you lost..." "We haven't lost any parts, Mom." He curled his tail around his shins. "It's not horrifying, thanks to the glamour. You'll know us when you see us, thanks to the glamour. He and Gus had planned this part. It still seemed unavailing. Some things happen to us. It's like bodybuilding. We're bigger. It's very odd. A long story. I'll tell you when I see you. They had resolved to tell and show their families all. Lies would be exhausting and pointless, and their families deserved the truth, even if it pushed them across the sundering. "Oh, Keen-Ide, oh, darling, yes, get here as soon as you can. Oh, and Gus?" "Yes, Mrs. C. Have you talked to your folks yet?" "Not yet." "Tell them to come over here. Oh, please, I want to see how happy they are. I want us all to be happy together." "Yes, ma'am." Doug promised to hurry home as soon as Gus had called his family, then hung up. "She's going to order some massive takeout feast, I know it," he said to Gus with a watery smile. Gus gave him a warm smile back and a hug with one arm as he started inserting coins with his other hand. "We're home, Gigi." But he paused before dialing and looked up and down the concourse. Doug did the same. Bright, industrial, modern, mundane. It did not fit. His family's apartment would be dear and familiar, but it would not fit. "Okay," Gus replied to the unspoken observation, "but we're as home as we can be for now, with the folks who love us. That's a lot." "That's a lot," Doug agreed. So they're back on Earth, in Chicago, home with their families. But of course, they're immortal. Their lives just go on. And we'll find out more about that next time.